All right, hello YouTube. So we're back into part 3 of the Grand Maester conspiracy video. If you guys like this type of content or want to see more of these type of videos from me, subscribe, like, and comment. I also wanted to say before this video starts that this video took a little longer because I wanted to finish up the Fire and Blood information that I wanted to talk about with this theory. So this video will cover the rest of Fire and Blood, as in like the Dance with Dragons, the after effects with Aegon II and Aegon III's rule. And then the next video, maybe 2, will be on Robert's Rebellion and the Maester's impact on that, as well as the current story and some of the things we've seen with them trying to affect how certain events happen. So let's get into this video, and I hope you all enjoy.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, getting into part 3 of the Grand Maester conspiracy, we're going to have to start with the peace negotiations that were tried before the breakout of the Dance with Dragons. And this starts specifically with the current Grand Maester. He asks specifically to be the one to go on this diplomatic mission to get peace with Rhaenyra. And it's just very odd to me that this is the character that does it. The Grand Maester doesn't have any more pressing matters at King's Landing. He thinks to himself to just go to speak with Rhaenyra. Now, why would he do this? As you'll see when this meeting happens, I believe that he personally was trying to sabotage this. That he didn't want there to be peace, which I think a big thing, as we see in a lot of, part 1 and part 2, the Maesters play a really big role in creating so much tension and painting some people as bad people when they're not really. And we see this coming up. So the text of Fire and Blood, which is, written by Maesters, specifically states that there were generous terms given to Rhaenyra. And this makes no sense because as we see what the terms are realistically that Rhaenyra has to bend the knee, and she will be given basically Dragonstone and all the incomes and land, which there pretty much aren't any, as we see with Stannis in the normal story. And that 2 of her children will be fostered in King's Landing and have places of court and will be a cupbearer. What this means to Rhaenyra is basically her children are basically hostages now. This is basically like what happens with Theon, but with nicer terms, more or less. This means that if Rhaenyra was to, act out again, they have 2 of her children. She won't ever be able to get another chance like this. It's just really bad terms, and they don't really make any sense. Like, Robb's terms in the normal story make more sense than this does. Like, I don't understand how these are generous. Because obviously the Maesters are pointing this bad figure onto the Blacks that, oh, they didn't want him to have peace and all this. Well, yeah, if you didn't give her any decent peace terms, who's going to accept this? Like, who would accept that? Now, after we have this Maester who gives the terms and stuff like that, Rhaenyra specifically asks this Maester, you remember my father, correct? And he responds with, yeah. And she says, who did my father name as her heir, or his heir? And he says, you, Rhaenyra. And this just goes to show that even the Maester knows he's not doing the right thing, right? He is supposed to be somebody that is a master of law and of, following through with his lord's wishes. And he specifically goes against that, and Rhaenyra is pretty much calling him out on his bullshit. So the next thing we really see that the Maesters have a big impact is when Rhaenyra pretty much sends out 2 of her children to basically rally up their strength. So she sends the, harder mission, which in her mind would have been to get the, Vale involved, White Harbor, and Winterfell. So she has, her eldest son do this, and he's very successful. He gets all 3 to come to Rhaenyra's cause, and she gives her second oldest son, Luke, to have the easier mission of the 2. It's a, closer distance, and the Storm's End and Lord, Baratheon are supposed to be very loyal to them, as they are related through Rhaenys and stuff like that. So Luke going on this mission, this should be an easy mission, right? He's given a letter from Rhaenyra to give to Lord Baratheon, and they think this is going to go pretty well. Little does Luke know when he lands there that Aemond is already there. This is the second son of Alicent and Viserys's marriage, he is already there, and he's already kind of made, terms and stuff with Lord Baratheon. But Lord Baratheon decides to, see what Luke has to say. So Luke then gives him a letter from Rhaenyra. Now, Lord Baratheon was not someone who could read. He was very illiterate. This letter goes straight to his maester. Now, the way that this is described in the book and the telling that we're given, it's very much kind of sounding like, if any of you guys have watched Lord of the Rings, it sounds like with Grimer Wormtongue and Theoden, where he's whispering into Lord Baratheon's ear. So we don't know what the letter contained, but here's what we know. Lord Baratheon got very angry at this point. He had a frown. He got very, very kind of condescending and, angry and spiteful towards Luke for some reason. And this is why I think that the Maester actually lied about what was in this letter. I think he wanted Lord Baratheon to go with the Greens and stuff like that, because what would Rhaenyra, why would she be saying anything that is disrespectful or something to make Lord Baratheon angry? She is trying to gain an ally here, and we've not seen, and she doesn't have any spite toward the Baratheons. So it just makes it very, very weird to me why this happens. And then we see basically this part of it, the Maesters don't have too much that they are involved with, but we see really the first big, blood of the, Dance with Dragons, as we see Aemond kill Luke and his dragon when they are trying to return to Dragonstone. And this is the first kinslaying we have. All right, now skipping to the end of the Dance with Dragons, I decided to skip all the events because realistically this is a Maester theory video, and the Maesters didn't control a lot of the events going on within the Dance with Dragons. The main point I was trying to make in the first few episodes of this series is that they had a lot of events and a lot of sway on why this conflict happened. Because in my opinion, the Maesters were trying to get this to be a war where the Targaryens were going to be at each other's throats. Because the Maesters realistically had no way of really killing the adult and bigger dragons. As you see by the end of the Dance with Dragons, there are no dragons really left. There are, living dragons, but they're wild, or we don't know where they are, or they're not taking another rider. They're very much out of the Targaryen hands. And this is the part that I wanted to get to next. And if you guys did want to see a Dance with Dragons, just video in general, where it's me talking about, what happens, the battles, more of a history video for those, let me know. I definitely can do that. I've, read through those chapters a bunch of times. I think it is the best part of Fire and Blood, which I don't think is a big hot take, but yeah. So getting into where we pick up with the Maesters and what they're trying to do is, after everything has been kind of resolved, right? Aegon II ends up, retaking the throne, more or less. There comes this issue where there's still a lot of unrest in the kingdoms, where Aegon II really did a poor job of giving peace to the realm. He wouldn't pardon people that fought for Rhaenyra and just end the war that way. He would more or less go to the castle with that lord or whatever and have them brought to King's Landing in chains and have them, basically, swear loyalty to Aegon. And then they'd have to pay a huge ransom, and they'd have to give up captives. So guys, I wanted to clarify one thing. I actually made a mistake when I was recording this, and I got the names a little messed up. So the person I'm talking about that was in the Vale and had the first, hatchling that we've seen in a long time for the Targaryens. Not a long time, but since the beginning of the dance, was actually Rhaena Targaryen, not Baela Targaryen. Baela was her twin sister. But yeah, so I just wanted to clarify that right now. You don't gotta tell me in the comments, I know. I goofed up. But yeah, just so you guys know, that was Rhaena Targaryen and not Baela Targaryen. So yeah. So you can see why this would be a huge issue. So there was still a lot of resistance within the kingdoms, the north especially, and in the Riverlands, as well as the Vale. Now, what's interesting about the Vale is the Vale actually had Baela Targaryen. Now, Baela Targaryen had been there throughout the entire war, more or less, And the big thing here with this story is eventually a dragon egg hatches in the Vale with Bela. And this occurred because the Vale had asked for, a dragon egg or dragons to help protect the Vale, because that was their one big weakness during, history of Aegon's conquest and stuff like that. So when they had sided with Rhaenyra, they had said they wanted some dragon protection. Now, this happening was a huge deal. This was the only young hatched dragon that was in a Targaryen's control at this point. And like I said before, the Vale forces were not exactly on Aegon's side. They had seen what had been happening to other houses, so they were still pretty much in rebellion. And how were they going to handle the Vale? How could the crown do anything to the Vale? They couldn't. As we know from the current story, as well as, Fire and Blood itself, the Vale is pretty impregnable. It's very hard to assault them. The only thing that's really outdone them is the dragons. Now, at this point, Aegon II and King's Landing in general, they had no actual dragons. So King Aegon II says, we need a dragon. Because if in the future, given that this baby dragon grows and such, a lot of these forces that had been repelling Aegon could rally behind Bela Targaryen and her, dragon, which would be the only living dragon that had been tamed at this point. That could be a huge issue. So Aegon II goes, hey, I need to get some dragons. And he goes to the Maesters at Dragonstone and says, give me some dragon eggs. So this is where it comes very interesting with the wording of the Fire and Blood text and the Maester's own account of what happened here. The Maesters hand-picked the eggs, right? They picked 7 to represent the 7 gods. And they sent them to Aegon II. And now we know from the text that none of these eggs ever hatch, which is awfully weird, because at this point, right, the dragon eggs had been hatching at a great, frequency, right? There was a lot of dragons before the Dance of the Dragons ever started. The only time we see a problem of dragons hatching is after, when there are no adult dragons left, and the Maesters can still kind of control events. As we see with these dragon eggs, they are specifically handled by the Maesters. There's nobody overlooking the Maesters. They get to choose whatever they want and do whatever they want. It is in my belief that these eggs were somehow poisoned, or they were at least tampered with to not hatch eggs, because it just doesn't seem right for all the information built up before this point that dragon eggs were hatching at a rapid rate to this where they just don't now. The only difference I can see is the Maesters are purely handling these eggs compared to other times when that was not the case. As we also see with the dragon in the dragon egg in the Vale, right? This egg had been given, during the beginning stages of the Dance of the Dragons, given to the Vale and given to Bela specifically. This egg could not have been tampered with, and more or less, it is the one that hatches. So that is a big key point I want to bring up, and it's kind of what we'll continue to see with this trend, is that there will be a point where the Maesters will have full and absolute control of the 7 kingdoms as we continue to go through Aegon II and then eventually Aegon III's reign. We will see that the Maesters had a great opportunity to just get rid of these eggs and make them to where they could never hatch, and eventually killing off the dragons. All right, so getting into Aegon III's reign. If you don't know, Aegon III is Rhaenyra's, well, at this point, her last son that we believed was still alive. We find out a little later that her youngest son with Daemon Viserys was actually still alive, but at this point, this was the last living son of Rhaenyra. And Aegon is a very interesting character because, as we've seen through the Dance of Dragons, he'd seen a lot of bad and a lot of chaos and just horrible things you shouldn't have, had to see at that young of an age. So, understandably, Aegon III was someone that did not like dragons. He did not have one of his own at this point. He'd watched his mother get eaten by a dragon, and he'd seen really all of his siblings, as well as his father, killed because of dragons. he was not the biggest fan of dragons, which is something that I really needed you guys to hear, because it's going to make a lot more sense later on in something I'm going to loop back to that statement with. But continuing on, during Aegon III's reign, there's this idea of succession, because we don't know who's going to be the successor. There's no male Targaryen available after Aegon III. If Aegon III was to die, we would have another problem where would the succession go? You had, you know, his wife, but his wife didn't really take a lot of interest in the throne or the politics. You had the twins, which were the girls I talked about earlier. That was it. Those were the Targaryens that were left at this point. So this came to this issue where all the lords and, you know, the councils debating, you know, out of the twins, who should be the next heir. And it was another one of these situations where one of them was better, but the other one was older. It was a Stannis Renly type situation where one of them was clearly a better idea for court and to be the queen, but the other one was older. So they kind of come to a decision where they're like, all right, you know, we'll go for this one, and that'll be the end of it. And then the Grand Maester at the time, out of nowhere, just goes, you know what? No, we can't do that. We had this great council before. We can't do this. But without presenting any other person, he just goes, don't worry, just leave succession to me, which is very odd because this is repeating the same issues we've seen in the past. This indecision of who is the next person in line is the reason there are so many problems and civil wars with the Targaryens and infighting. This is obviously the Maester having no idea what to do, but just delaying and possibly creating chaos later down the future. Thankfully, this does not lead to anything because of Viserys coming back, being another male heir, as well as, you know, Aegon III, getting a new wife and stuff like that. The next thing I wanted to bring up that I thought was really odd was there was actually a weird attempt on Aegon's life. And we don't know who actually did this. There's hints that are given upon who it is, but nobody really makes sense to me. Nobody really would want Aegon III dead, because all of the people ruling at this point are ruling because Aegon III is too young to rule. If it was to pass to the twins or anyone like that, they wouldn't need that, because the twins at this point were old enough to rule by themselves. So I'm not sure why any of the council would do this. I think it makes sense for the Maester to want to do this because Aegon III had become a very competent character and I think would have been able to lead on. But again, it doesn't make sense either because Aegon III was someone that didn't like the dragons and didn't want to bring them back. So it made sense for the Maesters to keep him in power. But I believe the Maesters also wanted the Targaryens to eventually die out, and killing all the male heirs was probably a big thing for them. So I could see their motivation behind wanting to do it. I'm just not sure if they actually did, because there's not a lot of evidence cited for who actually did it. Now, the last big thing that I wanted to talk about in this video and for the book of part 1 of Fire and Blood is there is a point in history, in the Targaryen history, where Maester Munkin rules for an entire year. He is the regent, the hand, he has absolute power. There's nobody checking him right now. He can do whatever he wants. There's no council he has to report to. He is in charge. Now, this, I think, is huge because, like I'd said, the dragon eggs had not been hatching, right? You know, we'd seen a few where they were, you know, deformed or poisoned. Morning was really the last dragon that had been hatched, you know, correctly and was a, you know, growing to a full-size dragon. But none else. And this really, for me, is interesting because we even see Maester Munkin convincing Aegon III to let his hand be relieved when there was only 2 counselors left, him and, you know, the former hand. There were a lot of, you know, events that happened to lead to this, you know, problem, which I'm not going to go into in this video, but eventually Maester Munkin is by himself, his absolute power. This would be the perfect time to ensure that the dragons never come back. Now, I don't have the greatest evidence for how he did this. I think some sort of poison was used or something like that to make it where the dragons would just never hatch. And I really am excited for if we ever get Fire and Blood Part 2 to really learn more about this. But like I said, there are no other dragons that are born correctly until Daenerys' dragons in the main story. So I think this is a very key point of time for this Maester conspiracy theory, because we don't know a lot that happens in this. There's an entire year where Maester Munkin is in charge, and the Maesters conveniently don't write any history down about it. They say, oh, he was he was in charge for a year, and then they skip to Aegon finding a new council. So in a story that is very detailed and tells about the histories of almost every single year from, leading up to the Dance of Dragons to way after it, and then the Aegon the Third, Aegon the Second type reign, they just skip over this? It seems very odd to me that this is just glossed over like nothing happened. If, how we've been seeing is the Maesters really gassing up the Maesters when they do really good things, why are they not giving Maester Munkin credit for running the realm for a whole year and, singing his praises? It's because they're trying to hide certain things that was going on during the Spirit, in my opinion. And the last thing I really want to say in this video before we end out this part is that the theory of just the dragons died out because the Targaryens kept them in captivity is so untrue. It's something that I think the Maesters suggested to cover this up, because we even see with Daenerys, right? She keeps her dragons in a lot of captivity, right? Early on, she keeps her dragons in cages, right? Drogon's the one that's usually with her. The other ones are usually in cages. And then we also see that she even, puts them, where they're not hunting again later on in the story. And this doesn't do anything with how they grow or anything like that. They're, maybe a little smaller than Drogon, but that's because Drogon is able to free roam this entire time. What I'm trying to say is there's obviously evidence that this isn't true. We've seen dragons being held in the dragon pits for, 150 years or longer, where this really didn't make a difference. They still are reproducing at a high level. So what I think is interesting is I think this is just an excuse for the Maesters to just save face, to say, oh yeah, this is why it happened, not because we were, tampering with these eggs or doing stuff with them. No, it was the Targaryens' fault. They just kept them in dragon pits. The people that knew the most about dragons, they were going to do this. Yeah, no, it doesn't make any sense. It's a really bad idea from the Maesters, and yeah. So that is it with all the stuff we're going to be talking about in Fire and Blood. The next video or two will be discussing the Maester's impact of breaking down the Targaryens. As we've seen, these first few videos have been talking about more or less the dragons, how they were trying to get rid of the dragons and limit the Targaryen power. The rest of these conspiracy videos are going to be how they tried to kill off the Targaryens in general, their impact within Robert's Rebellion, as well as even in the main story that we're going to talk about how they are kind of manipulating events and kind of playing the Game of Thrones like any of the other characters within the story. So thank you guys all for watching this video. I hope you guys all enjoyed. I've had a really fun time researching this topic and getting more knowledge on it. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys all in the next part of this series. And bye, guys.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.